I'm standing here in sorry. I exist in front of you as a human being, according to most opinions. My children exist, and somewhere upward of 150 other people exist in my family alone. Because one person properly educated, with intelligence and a background, decided that what was going on around him was just unacceptable. Excuse me. I've never spoken about this before, and those who know me know that usually, and many people here know me, usually all you have to do is wind me up, give me a topic, and I didn't know about this story, even though I'm over 50 years old, until a few years ago. I knew nothing about this. And as it turns out, I wasn't the only one. You heard in the film several times, and you heard from Professor Carroll, that there is a row of trees in Jerusalem that commemorates those individuals like Karl Lutz who decided not to go with the flow, decided not to go with what was easy, and they put themselves in danger. One of the it's not an easy honor to receive. There's a very strict committee that reviews the evidence for each individual that is nominated, just like the Nobel Prize. And one of the criteria that are put forward before the committee in its judgment is whether this individual acted selflessly or for some sort of a earthly reward. Am I the only Jew in the room? As usual? That's the book that I want to write, The Only Jew in the Room. My perspective is much different than y'all's. When we look at that row of trees that thankfully over the years we ran out of space for, and it has become a wall filled with names on plaques because there was no more room for the trees. The Jewish people look at it and say, that's unbelievable. We had no idea that so many people cared. We have no idea that so many people tried. We had no idea that so many people were involved in trying to stop what was going on and trying to save people. When I bring non-Jewish groups to the same place, and they look at that row of trees and at that plaque, they say, "That's it? That's it? That's how many stood up?" I was meeting a few weeks ago with a sweet young lady from China. And she was telling me about the Christian community in China. And she was very upset. And she was practically crying. And she said, the Christian community in China is tiny. It's minuscule. There are only 180 million of us. I looked at her and I said, "Have you ever met a Jew?" And this was in Israel. When this began, the entire Jewish people worldwide may have numbered, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a historian in this field, correct me if I'm wrong, may have numbered 13 million, 14 million, that many? About 16. And in a matter of 5 years, that number went from 16 to 10. Not because of a famine, not because of misfortune, not because somebody miscalculated, but because of an order, a simple order that many, many, many thousands, tens of thousands chose to comply with. They didn't have to comply with that. Every one of the people who participated chose to. When we come to the story of Budapest, my mother's story, the majority of the evil in Budapest was not perpetrated by German Nazis. The majority of the evil there were perpetrated by local Hungarians, a specific organization called Black Cross? Arrow Cross. I know it in Hungarian. The word in Hungarian is Nilos. And again, I've only known this story for 5 years. In short, this book was put out a few months ago. And the little kid on the cover here is my mother at 4.5 years old. And she's holding her doll. My grandfather, the story in this book is told from the perspective of the doll. It has been written so that kindergarten children, first graders, second graders, third graders can experience and touch the story without having to experience the immensity of the horror, without having to see the horrible pictures. It's written gently. It's sad. And it's happy. It's scary. And it's encouraging. But it removes the venom of the harshness so that a child can try to cope with the story through the eyes of a doll. My grandfather knew he was going to be taken away. My mother was 2. My uncle was just born. And he knew that his days in what was called the ghetto were numbered. He was a big, strong, burly athlete. He was a skier. He was a swimmer. And he knew that anybody that looked like him and had the physique that he had was going to be taken away quickly to the work camps. And my mother's story starts out in this book in those days that her father was taken away, and he slowly became a slimmer person and a less burly person and a less muscular person. And every few weeks or a few months, she doesn't exactly remember, he would actually show up at home in drab clothes, very drawn. And she actually remembers as a little girl asking certain questions about why can't you be home more often, and where are you going, and do they feed you? He decided that before they took him away for good, he would give my mother a doll, a friend, somebody to hold and to talk to and to, like all little girls do, many little girls do. He gave her this little doll. This doll is still with my mother today. 70 years later, I've never seen the doll. We moved continents, we moved cities. We've packed our house up and unpacked our house numerous times. I did not know this doll existed until she donated it for prosperity to an institution that would commemorate the story. They take my grandfather away, and those, if you could see, I mean, I know it's really far. The story goes that days go by, soldiers come in to take other family members. At some point in time, my grandmother decides that the safest place for my mother is in a Red Cross protected kindergarten. Until, was it 3 years ago now? My mother thought she was the only child from that kindergarten to survive. Until I came here to speak 3 years ago, and a sweet young man came over to me when we were done and told me his story, not knowing anything about my mom. And he connected pieces of the puzzle that my mother could not because she was a little girl. And we found out that somehow here was another person that survived that kindergarten. What happened at that kindergarten apparently was, and I'll tell my mother's part of it and then the final part of it. My mom got angry. She had a meltdown like children have. My son had one just a few minutes ago in Israel, and my wife and I were texting about it. She's like, get on a plane, get home now. But my mother had this meltdown alone, but for her doll. And she decided, this is all she remembers, she decided that she's not staying in this place because the nuns were mean. And she, together with the doll, left and made her way towards where a 4.5-year-old thought was home. Believe it or not, when we went to visit this place 5 years ago, my mother had been in the area several times but could not find the exact spot because she wasn't following the maps, she was following adult logic. And when I found where it might be and I forced her to walk in that direction, it was actually still there exactly the way she remembered it. The sign was still there. The sign that was at the end of this film was still there. Today, it's no longer there. We're not 100% sure what happened, but it's no longer there. My mother's story of survival is lengthy. She didn't find her way all the way home. The family went to look for her. She found her way to a market, and later a young man found her and helped her find her way to the house. What this gentleman who came told us was that his brother was a little bit older, and his brother came to visit him every few days, And on this particular day when he came to visit, this man was older than my mom, is older than my mom. When his brother came to visit, his brother realized that they had not given the children anything to eat in 3 days. Because what they were doing was they were starving out the kids so that when they took them to the river to execute them, there would be less of a objection from the children. I'm sure that if you took a few dozen 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and you tried to line them up on a river and shoot them, if they had breakfast and lunch and dinner, I don't think it would be such an easy task. But if they hadn't eaten in 3 or 4 days, it's probably a lot easier. So his brother took him, and they went outside to try to find some food, and when they came back, the children were all gone. So they left and never looked back. My mother remembers, after hearing this, that there was a candy. In this book it says chocolate. The way my mother told me it was candy. And she remembers that the nuns tried to take her candy away. And that's why they were mean, and that's why she decided to leave. If you put the two stories together, you realize that that candy could have A, created a riot amongst the kids, or if it was chocolate, it could have created even a bigger riot. And B, if they're trying to weaken the children, then having a kid, especially somebody as feisty as my mom, with a little bit of strength, could have been trouble. Karl Lutz saved over 62,500 people. He actually followed, there are a few factual errors in there that I would object. One of them was that he got permission from Eichmann to save 8,000 Jews. But he didn't make up this thing of 8,000 Jews equals 8,000 families. That was the Nazis' definition of Jew. A Nazi definition of Jew was the whole family. If you had 1/64, correct? 1/64 Jewish blood, which means 1 of 64 of your ancestors was Jewish, that was enough for you to be considered a Jew by Nazi standards. So what Karl Lutz did is he said, they gave me 8,000 permits, that means 8,000 families. The youth organization that you saw is actually the youth organization that my family is always associated with. It's the Religious Zionist Youth Organization. And the way Trudy and now Agnes, their stepdaughter, tells the story, at night when he would leave the office, he would leave his desk unlocked. And the young people from the youth organization would walk into the office, open up his drawer, and continue to make forged certificates. Several years ago, a museum opened up in Israel to tell this story. And in that, there's a room very much like this. It's darkened for the presentation, and next to each armrest, there's a panel with 4 buttons, A, B, C, and D. And throughout the presentations, the youth that come to this museum are asked difficult questions. One of the difficult questions is, if you have the ability to save 8,000 people, or if we stretch it, 8,000 families, do you suffice with saving the 8,000 families? Or do you stretch the envelope, endangering everybody by forging more and trying to save more? Because if one gets caught, that all of them go. Because it's based on trust. That's one of the difficult questions that the students are asked when they see this presentation. I want to end by bringing us into today. The lessons for today, 2016, 2017, and for the younger people here, as we go forward into the 2020s and 2030s. The world acknowledges this act as an act of evil. The world in the United Nations and in governments all over the world have commemorations and have museums and tell stories, and every year they have memorials, and there are plaques and there are honors all about this horrible piece in human history. But if you hear Karl Lutz's story and you read Karl Lutz's story, and Karl was not alone, his wife Trudy was an equal participant. His wife Trudy worked just as hard as he did. His wife Trudy took certificates, went to death marches, and grabbed people out of the line saying, "That's my Jew, this one is my Jew, this one is my Jew," and pulled them out of the line. His wife Trudy actually got into the water in the Danube to save a woman that had already been shot because she was on her list, and she grabbed her. It's all in the book. It's all in Dangerous Diplomacy. They worked very much together to do these things because they lived in the United States. They were educated at George Washington University. They arrived in Israel, then Palestine. They understood that there were certificates that the British were given in order to allow people, Jews, to go into Palestine, and they used all this knowledge and they put it all together to create a puzzle that allowed them to save people. But how does that impact on us today? Today, can people mass murder with impunity? Yes or no? Could governments go and say, we're going to wipe out one kind of people because we don't like them or we disagree with them? Has that disappeared in our world? Not only has that not disappeared in our world, but even in the parts of our world where we have a say, there are people walking around today. The people being killed today are mostly Christians, whether it's in Syria, whether it's Iraq, whether it's in Asia or Africa, because there are no more Jews in those places. So now they're going after the Christians. But what happened with Karl Lutz was, he was a little man with round glasses. And one of the stories there that repeats itself is he's standing in front of a massive, big Hungarian monster, killer, bloodthirsty, with permission to kill. And the little guy with glasses takes a piece of paper, real or unreal, that looks official, and he shoves it in the face of the Hungarian and he says, "My Jew." And the monster backs off and says, "Okay." And he did this over and over again. Entire buildings filled with people that they wanted to come and destroy. He would stand in front of it and say, with a piece of paper, just a piece of paper with a stamp on it. You saw some of them. "My Jew." What would happen today, and I don't have to give you the answer because you know it, what would happen today if any one of us stood in front of any one of these modern killers with a piece of paper and said, "Mine, you don't touch them"? Who would get shot first? The modern killers would shoot the person with the piece of paper between the eyes and then continue to do what they're doing. We have not learned anything from history. We have not taken a stand on anything. If anything, it has gotten worse. And the problem is that we stand by, and in those days, law and order. So if the law was that the piece of paper was valid, no matter who you were, you listened to the piece of paper. That would never happen today with what's going on. And we still stand by and allow it to happen. Karl Lutz paid a horrible human price for what he did. I know he went to his grave happy. I know he went to his grave satisfied that he did the right thing. But from a very particular human perspective, why have we never heard his name until very recently? Why are there people in this room who are hearing his name for the first time today? How could it be that I'm standing on this planet and I'm semi-educated and I never heard this man's name, despite the fact that I'm here because of him? When he went back to Switzerland, he was told, we don't do things like that. And he was told that if he allows anyone to honor him, give him an award, tell his story, learn from it for history, they will drop him down in rank, they will take away his pension, and he will live out the rest of his days in poverty. Since he had nothing else to do to save people, all he had to say was, okay, don't give me any honors, don't honor me for that. My reward is going to come someplace else, although he didn't do it for reward. And only after his death, his widow, ex-wife widow, and then his stepdaughter continued to start telling his story in much greater. That same country, Switzerland, that is considered to be a bastion of human existence, it is considered to be neutral when it comes to war. That same country, Switzerland, this is something I do from the opposite direction in my classes, that same country, Switzerland, was the last country in the Western world to give women the right to vote. 1975, believe it or not. Until 1975, women did not have the right to vote because women were not considered human beings in Switzerland. We have to look, and I'm talking mostly to the young people here, we have to look hard at the realities behind the stories. Who is telling us what? Who is leading us in what direction? Not to take things at face value. Look for the evils that are out there and try to find our little way each and every day to rectify that evil. Whether it's standing up for a kid that's being harassed in school, whether it's stopping somebody from bugging somebody else at a baseball game or a football game, whether it's using racial epithets, thank you. Whatever the bad that's taking place, somebody who's pushing somebody else in the line at the supermarket, it doesn't necessarily have to be the evil, it could also be the good. A mother standing there with 3 kids who are screaming, who has her, and we have a cart full of stuff, and she has 3 carts full of stuff. You know what? It's be a little bit of a pain, but if we let her go first, maybe, over the course of time, your kids will be able to stand here and say, we made a difference.